You're listening to Platemark with me, Ann Shafer. Platemark is a podcast about a particular niche in the art world, that of prints and the printmaking ecosystem. We're talking about fine art prints, usually limited editions, etchings, lithographs, screen prints, relief prints. In Series 3, I'll introduce you to artists, printers, publishers, gallerists, curators, art historians, and conservators in order to demystify this rarefied world and show you that we're just people, albeit with some really cool jobs. In this 5-part mini-series, I'm talking to 5 artists who were selected to be included in an exhibition called 5x5 that was part of Print Austin's Winter Festival in 2024. The juror of the show is Myzska Lewis, who's a curator at Tandem Press, and whose taste I respect deeply. My guest today is one of those 5 artists from the 5x5 show. Her name is Annalise Gratovich. We take a deep dive into the ins and outs of chine collé, and I'm telling you, it's a deep dive. We also talk about her Ukrainian heritage and inherited trauma, cuteness as a means to help viewers access difficult subjects, and her recent battle with a mysterious autoimmune disease. Let's see. Oh, housekeeping. I identify as a cishet white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images Annalise and I talk about will be in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Also, do me a favor and hit the support and donate button over on the website and sign up to be a monthly supporter. You can help me keep the lights on. Your help would be most appreciated. I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Annalise, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark today.
I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this, and I love your podcast. I was just listening to the Valkyrie Remling episode and have just had a blast. And I like you a lot since we met in Baltimore years ago. So I'm just really looking forward to chatting with you today.
That's true. You came to the Baltimore at the museum when we had the print fair there back in must have been 2015, and you were working with Catherine and Mike at Flatbed Press at that point. So yeah,
That's
we do know each other from prior days.
That's right. Yes.
So and Val, did you go to Tamarind?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
I didn't. No, but I of course love them and follow their work, and just like seeing what's going on there in Tamarind. Yeah,
she's hilarious.
Yeah, I don't know her personally.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know her personally.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Well, all right. So the reason that you are on I was going to get to you, I promise. But it was precipitated by you being included in a Print Austin exhibition, 5x5, which included, funny enough, 5 artists and 5 of their works, which I thought was kind of a brilliant way to do it. So I'm circling around to all 5 of you and just eager to dig in. Before we go too far, can you introduce yourself for everybody?
Yes, my name is Annalise Gratovich. I am a printmaker living and working in Austin, Texas. I work at the Blanton Museum here in my day job career as the matting and framing preparator. So I'm a museum tech, and I oversee the care of the works on paper in the collection. So that's prints and drawings and photographs and books, manuscripts, so anything on paper in the museum. So that's a really, really fun, dynamic job. And then I have my personal studio career as well. So they work pretty symbiotically, which is really enjoyable.
I'm not sure that we've talked to anybody who's had any time as a preparator. Can you briefly just tell people, what does that really mean?
Yeah, so I have a studio off the pretty massive prints and drawings storage area in the museum. And so I work hands-on with the objects. I don't do the installation so much of the objects unless it's something that is hands-on with the work that's not in a frame, or if there's some special, if it's an installation or something that requires special handling, I will do that. But I mat and frame works, and I build custom housings. So things that need armatures or mounts, I'm building custom mounts for books and for sculptural prints. And I do some light conservation there. I'm in the collections department, but used to be in prints and drawings department. I have a position there that's kind of, it's almost a little hybrid between curatorial and collections. But I say all that to say that I will also kind of advise on media lines, or I'll talk to colleagues a lot about print processes, since I'm also a practicing printmaker. So that's really fun because I get to use my personal expertise and experience with prints and talk to my colleagues in all departments about that. So that's really fun.
I have no doubt, because this happened to us, that your curators probably don't have a lot of hands-on experience with printmaking, and having somebody with your experience in the department or nearby, adjacent, oh, so helpful.
Well, and it's really cool too, because sometimes we get these projects, like even as a printmaker, I will look at it and be like, I have no idea how this was done. Okay, so let's like look at it. It's almost like forensic printmaking and finding the layers and kind of deciding, okay, well, this looks like, a photo process, and then this looks like dry point or mezzotint. Sometimes it's more often in contemporary printmaking when those are kind of like puzzles. But also sometimes with historic printmaking and, little blips of techniques that have appeared over time. And yeah, I'm not an art historian, but also loving print. Sometimes I can find the answer. So that's fun.
Are you tempted at all by conservation?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I love conservation. I love the science. That's one thing that's really fun with my career, because it's a lot of problem solving. And it's a lot of hands-on with the objects. So I have to know museum best practices, working with papers from vellum to photography to papers that are from the 1400s to things that are very sculptural. And, I have to, of course, always have this idea of preventative conservation in my handling and in my prep work. And so that's really interesting. It's also incredibly hard to find up-to-date, really good scientific information because I'm outside of the conservation world. So I'm still learning. I've been here at the museum for 5 years now, so I'm still learning the resources and what's available and how to find answers to my questions. And so sometimes that's very collaboration heavy, and I'll reach out to contacts in other museums, locally or nationally, and we'll have conversations, and it's fun to be able to do that. That really scratches a collaboration itch that I have.
So tell us when you figured out you were an art person.
Ooh, I don't know. Sometimes I still wonder if I'm an art person, but I was raised by musicians, so I was raised in a very artistic household. I loved to draw and collect images, and was always just a very visual person, much, much more than music. I was not musical, still am not musical. So, yeah, that was fostered in me. Pretty much anything I wanted to do, I was very fortunate that it was, my creativity was fostered and curiosity. And so I found printmaking when I was 16 and really fell in love with it. Yeah, I know it's been almost 20 years now, which is crazy. And fell in love with it and just decided, this is the thread I'm going to pull. And it's led to a really rich life so far, and a lot of different print adjacent careers.
Because you were a collaborative printer in your past.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah. So I started off when I was in college. I had a really hard time. And this is funny because you and Valerie in that episode were talking about school structure. I had a horrible time with school structure. It's very difficult for me. So I would work a little bit in school, and I would take a break and work, and then I'd go back to school. So I started interning at Flatbed and then working at Flatbed before I graduated. And I thought I wanted to be a collaborative printmaker. And so I entered that space, and then realized I was probably more interested in the collections side, and then what life is the work going to have once it's been made. And I really enjoyed curating and doing exhibitions. So I kind of switched. I did collaborative printing on certain projects for people. And so that was very fun. But I kind of moved away from the collaborative side, I'd say pretty early, and went more to the gallery curatorial collection side, which I think really set me up for my current career path.
I used to talk to a long, long, long time ago, my gosh, to Ben Levy, who was in our department long ago, about his next choice, the same kind of idea that you had, like, I think I want to do this thing. And then suddenly you're like, well, but maybe I should do this other thing. And my point to him always was, if you're in a print shop and you're the collaborative printer, you'll work with 10, 15 artists in a year, excuse me, or whatever. But art history, and if you dabble in the contemporary world, like, the variety is so much greater, and your options for doing things outside of just that printing part are so much greater. And I think I talked him into it. Kind of went to the art history side like the devil.
Yeah, you're so right about that. I never thought about that, but it's very true. And I formed a lot of great relationships, and being able, like, loving someone's work and wanting to show it, and then having the ability to do that and expand a new audience, and just make those introductions is really beautiful and really fun. And I loved it. I loved the time I was curating. We did a print fair as well in conjunction with Flatbed, very small compared to tiny compared to what you have done. But it was also very difficult and really enjoyable. And inviting publishers and artists to do that is the event space is very demanding. But I loved that as well.
Yeah.
And I wish I had more time to do more curation and get more involved in that. But alas, so many hours.
All right. Well, maybe you'll carve some time out somewhere in along the line here.
Yeah.
As a 16-year-old, you tripped over printmaking in school, which I find amazing that high schools anywhere offer anything. I mean, I did a linoleum cut in 4th grade, but that's different than really diving into printmaking. It's an amazing school that can offer that.
Well, this was Austin Community College. It was not my high school. I think when I was a child, I was enrolled in some, art camp where I did a screen print of a sunflower. That was actually my first print ever. At that time, I didn't know anything about printmaking, and then came back to it in community college. But as I said, I had a really hard time with academia, and that definitely started in high school. So I dropped out of high school as soon as I legally could in the state of Texas, which was the tender age of 16.
Wow.
And, like, looking back at that, I think it's just kind of crazy. And my parents, I guess, were supportive. My mom was supportive as long as I got higher education. She was like, as long as you figure out what you want to do and you follow through with that, it doesn't really matter. So I was able to test into ACC and took classes there. And so I was really young. And our community college program in Austin is incredible. The school is amazing. And they have fashion incubators, and they work with local TV stations and with radio programs. I'm still friends with my mentors, my print mentors there at the community college. And so I just love that program. I recommend it to anybody here that wants to get into anything and, like, find an ACC program. So anyway, did that. And that's where I found printmaking. I was taking art history classes in the basement of the school, which is where the print shop was. And I remember walking by and just thinking, wow, this looks really cool. Like, these crazy machines and these danger signs, and, like, what's the acid room? And then seeing what people were making and the work that was coming out of there. And then the print kids were really cool. So I was just like, I want to try that. And as soon as I did, I was hooked.
Did you start with relief and stick with relief, or did you go all the way around the gamut?
Yeah, my first class was a survey class. So we did, I don't remember which order it was, but we did relief, we did etching, and we did litho. And there wasn't a screen option at that point. And so I liked relief, loved etching, terrified of litho. So I ended up, because I loved etching so much, I ended up really running with that, and then kind of specialized in that pretty early, while I had access to the chemistry into those facilities, and really loved to draw. So a lot of my imagery was detailed and pattern heavy, which has continued into my work. and then got back into relief later in my life. And so those are the two things that I would say I specialize in now. Really,
Right. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love an etching? Really, let's be frank.
So luscious and just beautiful.
Exactly. Although I have to say, between Valkyrie and Deb Cheney, and Micah Barnes, the three lithographers I've talked to, forcing myself into it because it's always seemed so flat to me. But I think it was Deb who described that basically the inks are so integrated that they're in the paper, not on the paper. And that idea of the print being one with the paper, I was like, okay, all right, now I'm in.
Yeah, that's what oh man, I do love lithography, and I think it's an amazing process. But yeah, I've always found myself wanting more interaction between the matrix and the substrate. And so I tend to look for that physicality. And that's why I tend to like works on paper more than other two-dimensional media, because of that relationship and the way that the matrix really impresses upon the substrate. And that's just that little bit of physicality can make a lot of difference. So that's how I've always thought of it.
I agree with you. And I sort of wonder if it's because it is so, the hand of the artist is so much clearer,
Yeah, it could be. Mm-hmm. But love those litho colors too.
Well, that was I don't know if you've listened to the Deb thing, but I was asking her about inks because I'm always like, I don't understand,
Yeah.
playing dumb. But she was talking about how the litho inks have to be so much more saturated in color because there's such a tiny, thin, microscopic layer that's going down. And in order to have any color of any power, that it has to be super saturated. I think that was the word she used.
Yes. And this just reminded me that I use litho ink for my relief.
Oh my.
Yeah, I use it's a black Hanco that I love printing relief, like black ink relief classic. Just it's perfect. So I use a litho ink because it is so saturated and highly pigmented.
Wow.
Yeah.
But so maybe we should talk about your relief works because they're beautiful and gigantic. And I'm fascinated to hear you say that you love the perfectness of the black on the paper and everything. Because when you add color to your works, you don't add color through a extra block or anything. You're using a little piece of Shenkle. And I know we've talked about Shenkle a ton, but can you describe how you're doing it?
Yes. So I am insane with my Shenkle. I like to have a very precise color palette. And so I hand dye my papers. And Shenkle is essentially a way of collaging different, in my case, hand-dyed pieces of paper onto a woodcut as it's being printed. So I'm carving one key image, and then I'm setting multiple pieces of dyed paper into the ink on that woodcut in the area that I want to color. And then the white paper goes over that. It all goes through the press, and it's all glued together and printed upon at the same time. So I'm skipping a lot of technical steps of like paper hydration and adhesive types and all these technical things that go into that process to make it successful. But in a nutshell, it's layering papers to add color rather than a different matrix for each color.
Okay, so for the folks at home,
yeah,
I just want to make it clear that you've got your block sitting on your press bed, and then you've got it inked up. So there's ink sitting on the relief areas. And then the paper goes down, the Shenkle pieces of paper, the little pieces of color, and those you've already brushed with glue on both sides, one side?
Just one side. Yeah, okay. Just the side that's going to be touching the white paper.
Okay. So they're being held onto the block probably by the black ink.
By the sticky ink.
Yes. Okay, by the sticky ink. And then the big sheet of paper, the white paper goes down, and the press basically transfers all the ink and all the paper and all that glue onto the piece of paper.
Ideally. Ideally, if we do it right. And it's like with the current one in my series, that giant woodcut, they're life size. So the block is my height, 5.5 feet. They're 3 by 5.5 feet. That piece has about 60 different pieces of hand-dyed paper in it. And I prepared about 1,000 pieces of paper for that edition and all the prints that are outside of the edition and the color trials. And that's why I say I'm kind of insane with it. But I love it. And I love being experimental with that process. And to make it successful, I work with a team of 3 other printers. So there are 4 of us total. We each have a very specific role that we perform in order to have all of these materials come together on the press bed at the right time. Because if our paper gets too dry, it won't stick. If it's too wet, it won't stick. If the glue isn't on there right, I use a powdered wheat paste. If that's not on there right, it won't stick. Or it'll squish out, these different problems will happen. So it's quite a process to bring it all together, and it's a lot of fun.
You can see the question marks above my head, right? So question 1, is the large sheet, the base sheet, damp?
Yes.
Okay. Because there are ways in which you can print on dry pieces of paper, right? Like it's not always damp.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so the dampness really helps with this powdered Shenkle process. So the dyed paper is damp, and then the white BFK paper is also damp. And so it's the combination of the hydration of those papers that really work well together when they meet on the press bed. And then it also helps with relief, because you have those negative areas of the negative space that you're carving out. Really what's holding the paper to the dyed paper to the white paper is the areas where the block kisses, right? And so that makes the strongest contact. And so having the damp paper also just helps with the receptive quality of the paper, because it's just a bit more open and pillowy.
Okay.
As the fibers have been expanded. And so it just really helps with that contact and makes a great, beautiful embossment too.
I've never asked this question. I don't know why it just came in my brain. When the paper is damp, the fibers are relaxed in a way. And does that mean that more ink will adhere because there's more places for it to go, microscopically, places for it to go? Or is it just that it sits better on the damp nib? You know what I'm saying?
I would say yes. I would say yes to the first. I think it makes, and so, I think it does really help the paper absorb whatever it's needing, the pigmentation. I think absolutely. Even though, we are working with oil-based inks, that paper is still highly receptive.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That shouldn't work, should it?
I know, but printmaking.
Printmaking.
I don't know, and I could be wrong about that. I'm like, that sounds great and makes sense. Somebody out there could be listening and just saying that's not right, but I don't know.
Well, you can write in and let us know we're wrong, wherever you are. But like in the 19th century, well, probably even earlier, when the papers were made out of wood and they were crappy and they weren't really receiving ink very well, that's when the blossoming of chine collé occurred, because you could get such a much richer impression on those thin tissues. And they were so thin and scary, they decided, right? I assume that's how this happened. But like it'd be really interesting to see just, a little one, like if all of the same ink, the same print, across a ton of papers, and just to sort of make that really clear about what happens and what kind of paper is better and dry and wet, blah, blah. I'm sure somebody's done it. But
it sounds like a great scholarly project for somebody out there. I would read that paper.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody write that paper, will you? Yeah. All right. Now we know about your crazy process, because 80 pieces per, of Shenkle is kind of nutso to keep them all damp in the same way. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's a lot. And it's interesting too, because one of the first, when I really was expanding my knowledge as a student, one of the first big etchings that I editioned was a diptych of 2 large copper plates that were, I say large, they were maybe 18 by 22-ish, which is large. They were a diptych, and it had really complicated Shenkle. And then I did an edition of like 50, because I was like, I'm going to see if I can do it. So I spent a lot of time just chugging out, those prints. I don't think I finished that number, but I was really just trying to see what I could do. in terms of additioning and repetition and then doing that Shenkle. So it's funny that looking back at that piece and then also seeing the insane Shenkle I'm doing now, 16-year-old me would be would be satisfied, I like to think.
But I feel like in your prints, particularly the large figures, the color, I mean, they're subtle colors. They're not like, hey, I'm fluorescent yellow or whatever. But they just sort of bring the whole thing that kind of clicks all together. All those little pieces of play, it's like the exactly right thing to do.
Thank you. I think very carefully about my placement and how to turn what I think of as a black and white image, right? I'm working with key image. And I love, like I said, a black and white print. I created these pieces to be black and white prints. And then when I started co-publishing them with Flatbed Press, this is an ongoing series of 7. There will be 8 total. There are 7 currently done. They're figurative. Each one is a separate figure. I've done, I guess I can say, average 1.5 a year. No, one every year and a half or so, because I've been working on it for 10 years now. So where was I going? When I started co-publishing with Flatbed, that really allowed me to expand the scope of the project. And that's when I started thinking about adding color. So I also think about it just very carefully. What is going to enhance the image that I've already designed to be very strong and finished, in my opinion, as a black and white image? How do I add a color element to that in a way that really enhances it and doesn't detract from it? And how do I make those colors, sophisticated so that I'm satisfied with them? That's why I started hand dyeing my paper. And so I play with the placement a lot. And so that comes across in the color trials too. There are times I have to completely nix a color or, subtract color and have a nice stack of black and white and then color elements and blending that together. So that's definitely a problem solving stage I go through.
Right. Well, now you got me curious about the dyeing. How does that work?
Yeah. So I've found that I like using gouache pigments.
Okay.
Because they are very opaque. I use mulberry papers. And so the pigment really sits on the paper beautifully. And it has just a very soft, velvety quality that I like. It's very different than ink on paper, than printing ink on paper. It has a very different look and texture to it. And so I really like that. So I start with color swatches and recipes. I make detailed notes of my color mixing so that when I find a color I like, I know exactly how to expand it into bulk when I'm in the color production. So now I have lots of swatches of different colors and different recipes. And that's a really helpful resource for me to go back to when I'm developing a new print. And so it's just lots of color experimentation and creating a system that I know I can replicate and expand.
You're saying that you're dyeing the paper, but you're using a pigment, a gouache, which is an opaque watercolor that's usually brushed onto something. You're diluting it and then soaking the paper?
It's a vat dyeing process.
Okay.
Yeah. I use a really special system of Tupperware. Large Tupperware. And I've kind of designed a hanging system so I can hang it to dry it. And so it's also beautiful when it's in production, these streaming pieces of paper and the color and filling the room with those papers is really attractive and satisfying to me. And then the drips on the floor, everything about the process, I really enjoy.
I feel an installation piece coming on.
Yeah. Yes, I've definitely thought about it. Maybe if I can do a residency or something like
right.
that.
That's great. Well, so tell us about the series of the 7 figures plus the one that will be joining them shortly.
So the series is called Carrying Things from Home. And it's so far comprised of 7 figures. Each one is this totemic being that represents a soul identity and kind of purpose in life. And the impetus for this series is my Ukrainian family history. My father's Ukrainian, and he and his parents left World War II very suddenly with what they could carry with them. And they became war refugees. And they traveled for several years and were sponsored to come here by the Tolstoy Foundation. And so this idea of displacement and loss and identity, personal and cultural identity, and longing and belonging, all these ideas are woven into this relief work. And it draws heavily upon my interest in Indigenous Ukrainian motifs and art forms and textiles, especially. And then I also have a big interest in botany and plants, love plants of the American South and Southwest. And so the figures are adorned in these textiles that allude to faraway places that are, the figures are melancholic, maybe they're from a place that is lost or cannot be returned to, but I root them to a new homeland with the botanical imagery, the flora and fauna of the American South and Southwest that surrounds them. That is the series in a nutshell.
Okay. And each of the figures looks like a...
Oh, they look like a Matryoshka doll.
let me help.
Yes. So they're loosely based off that form. And that's something that I came to when I was in school. I found printmaking community college. I did that for a handful of years. I went to university at UT Austin, continued my print interest there. So I was drawing these characters and creating narratives, and they were very, round and cute. And I like to kind of joke around. I had this professor that said at one point I should be designing Hallmark cards because yeah, but I know, but also sick burn. But too, cuteness and femininity and beauty in work and the acceptance of that is a whole other topic of conversation. I love beauty. I love cuteness. I embrace that about my work. People often say it's cute. And it's also monumental. And I think that combination, cuteness disarms people. It opens us. It makes us receptive. We feel safe. And then we can start to have introspection and communication. And I love for there to be a space between my work and a viewer so that they can enter that conversational space and we can explore things that are hurtful and painful, and hopefully my greatest dream is to start to heal some ancestral trauma, some familial trauma.
Inherited trauma.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there are lots of losses, kinds of losses in the world, but loss of home, it's unimaginable for those of us who were, brought up in the suburbs of New York City. Like it's another world.
It's very bewildering. And I am very Texan. I have my community here and I've been embraced by the print community and I have amazing friends and colleagues in the arts. And so I also don't know. I don't know what that's like either. But I know that there's loss and it's something that I feel and it's something that I've investigated. I'm not the one that left my home, but my father was. And I think that there's a lot of ways that has manifested in my life, of course. And then also to be from a just almost continuously war-torn country and that these are things that are still happening all over the world. There's there's a lot to say too about my ability to make art about it because I'm here now. So those are all pretty profound things that I think about quite often.
Well, and sad in a way that your work has a new urgency because of, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. It's incredible. I mean, oh my God, I don't want to start. Is your dad still alive?
Yeah, he is. He is. He just turned 83 last year. Yeah. And he's not only alive, he's also still performing, which is what he's done his entire life. He still plays with the symphony and the orchestra and he teaches. He's retired from his career, but he still performs.
I have this image of him with an accordion, but what is it? What was he teaching?
Oh, he plays violin.
Okay.
He plays violin. Yeah, my grandfather was the
Oh,
accordionist.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
God.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I learned not long ago that my dad became a violinist because the fiddle player in my grandfather's Ukrainian folk band moved away, and so they needed a new violinist, and so he had my dad do it.
He just picked it up and presto.
He just picked it up in presto, and he started at a very early age, and then my grandfather sadly passed when my dad was, I think, 23. So then he was performing and teaching to support the family. And that just became his whole life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. But the other thing about the figures, I mean, there's something about their eyes that it always makes me think of anime characters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure why, but there's something about the shape and the sort of dark, almost like football.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So they have a very doll-like quality to them in the eyes and this simplified, very like immediate emotional representation, I guess I should say. Their pupils are usually very large. They have, the water shine to them. The cheeks, I think of them as like rosy doll cheeks, but they're not. They're black and they're prominent, and they run from the, immediately under the eye down to the corner of the face. And so that's also kind of this visual cue that I use to this deeper content. It's not just a round, cute, approachable form. And then, of course, there's a lot of elements too that are darker. Maybe a child-size coffin in the arms, or a pierced animal, or things that So I talk about this approachability and cuteness because that is something that I think can't be understated. But yeah, it's not all there is. So.
Well, the thing that hit me first was that they're all holding sort of a something right at their chest level that helps you understand what I think the most important thing that they took from home, that the thing that symbolizes home for them is the thing that they're carrying.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think for me, I mean, it was like such a good way to, I mean, because people are more than the roles they play in a community, right?
Yeah.
But knowing, my identity is so wrapped up in my work as a curator, like I know exactly how that, if I couldn't carry that around with me, I would be lost.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, now my work is so wrapped up in who I think I am. Yeah, it's such a central part of my life. Yeah, and so they each have something that alludes to their personhood and their identity. So the figures are the mariner for exploration, and the hunter for food. There's a builder for shelter. There's a musician for the arts. There's a mother and an undertaker for life and death. The most recent is the healer, which is a bit more metaphysical and personal. And then the final in the series is going to be the fool, which will also be a bit esoteric. So those are the figures in this series.
Well, so that brings up a question: is if the last two are sort of a little bit less concrete ideas about who they are. When you started it, did you know I'm going to do 1 through 8, and these are who they're going to be, or did it morph over time as you've grown and changed?
A little bit of both. I kind of realized from the beginning that I wanted there to be 8, and I pretty quickly designated the identities of them. The healer was going to be the judge, and that in I guess when was it that I decided to change it to the healer? It was before I got ill, and we may touch on that, but I think it was also during our political climate of 2016 that I just kind of realized, the judge just isn't going to fit this. I think I want it to be a healer.
Well, the judge has become so political now. It doesn't hold the same kind of weight for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted there to be just a different energy in the piece as well. Something
Right.
that's more uplifting and hopeful, I think, than something judgmental.
Right.
To use the title.
It's so interesting to me because the figures, and we will move on to other works, sorry, people, but
Mm.
I just love these. They're life size. They look like these dolls, but they also have this sort of, the elders kind of a presence.
Mm.
And in my made up mind about what the elder women in a Russian or Ukrainian or Eastern European or whatever Greece
Mhm.
kind of community is always in black and always silent and
Mhm.
always a little bit terrifying.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of color, and especially in Eastern Europe, a lot of beadwork and beautiful embroidery and flowers, and botanical imagery, highly high adornment. And so each of these figures too has a crown that they're wearing, which is kind of alluding to the traditional flower crowns and beaded crowns that Ukrainian women wear around ceremony. So that element is there along with the embroidery and the stylistic outline of traditional clothes on the textiles.
Earlier, you mentioned the idea of indigenous communities and Ukraine, and for me, I was like, wait, isn't aren't the people who are Ukrainian, haven't they always been? And is there a separation between what we would consider to be indigenous versus other people who have been there for a long time, like people who are maintaining traditions of when they were nomadic peoples, or like how do you?
Oh yeah, so I was referring to the traditionally Ukrainian embroideries. And yes, different regions have different stylizations and different symbols in their imagery in the folk arts that carry different talismans or different symbols of fertility or good fortune. And so yeah, when I say that, it's to allude to those visual languages that are Ukrainian.
Okay. Gosh, it's such an interesting. Words are so bizarre,
Mm.
like what I was bringing to indigenous is different than what you're bringing to
Oh
indigenous. And I'm
sure,
thinking,
yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about sort of traditional costume and embroidery and things like that, like the
Mhm.
word folk came in my mind, which is a
Mm.
bad word now, like, you can't win.
That's Yeah, that's why conversation is so great. And and also conversation about the culture and arts, and to express these ideas clearly.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have a show up that's about to close as we're recording this at Flatbed Press with your buddies Alyssa, Catherine, and Mike. And I saw some pictures on your gram
Yes.
that look super cool, including the 7 figures that you have framed. Oh my God, I can't imagine how much that cost. But then you have these smaller works, and some of them have some cording that is crossed in front of the glass. And I
Mm.
wanted to ask you what is happening.
Yes. So those are part of a series of collages. So to introduce those, I'll introduce my collage practice, which really arose out of my desire to use the materials I produce. And so a lot of times, prints that don't make an edition because I Shenkle so much, they're often on thin papers that lend themselves really well to collage and layering and cutting. And then with my scrap dyed paper, I like to selectively ink and print design elements from my editions. And I'll cut out those pieces and create collage work that I think of as like visual poems, or incantations is the word that I'll use sometimes. So there's a lot of hands, there's a lot of botanical imagery, there's celestial imagery, there's seeds. So a lot of this imagery has to do with like an incantation or a prayer, or ideas like that, hope and longing. Yeah, so I started adorning the frames as a way to kind of strengthen that idea of like a talisman. And I also have a budding interest in traditional paper cutting too, Eastern European paper cutting, which is very strong in Poland, very strong in Ukraine. And traditionally those were, they'd be hung over windows and doors, and, the tree of life is very present, and therefore good fortune and to dispel bad spirits. So this work is I think, referential of that. And so for these pieces that you're thinking of, their hands that are floating above them are different seeds or botanical elements, and the hands are holding them, almost an offering. Then there are copper tacks driven into the face of the frame, around which I have woven with a twine, just to create a different visual pattern around the piece. But it also makes the frame and the print a cohesive object in, working in unison. So it's almost like a little talisman.
Because you've created the frame and everything else, like it's an object now, right?
Yes, exactly.
And when you were things, this is the weird thing about when you're talking to people, like the images that were flashing into my brain were the God's eyes we used to make as kids.
Oh, yeah, those? I remember those.
Yeah. Everyone remember those.
Yeah.
But also when you wrap a brown paper package and you have the strings going from both sides, and you pick up the paper, this cord,
yeah,
you can carry the thing. So it's like it's almost like a portable something that you're going to pick up. But there's also the fact that it visually is crossing in front of your image.
It does, yeah.
In a almost could be I'm Xing it out sort of a way. So it's almost like a could be a block.
Yeah, it's interesting. I try to do it so that the core imagery in the frame is kind of almost framed again with the twine, the opening of the twine. But it definitely does cross in front of the imagery. So you almost have to peek inside of it, which is also something I'm interested in. These are very small. These are like 5 by 7. Okay. So they're hand held, they're hand size.
Right.
And I'm interested in doing them larger. I was actually talking to a friend of mine about casting some larger tacks and doing this on larger frames and creating a more physical object. And I have some of these where I have used rhinestones and have built letters with those rhinestones. They're black and not quite shiny, not quite matte. So they're not, I wouldn't say it's gaudy, but it's definitely ornamental. And so I'll create words with those. So I also have a series of paper comet collages that are titled Good Luck Stray Star. And so that text wraps around these frames with the rhinestone letters.
Fascinating. Now I'm trying to thread through all of the varying ways you're making images and finding the through line. All right, I'm going to think about that.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for that direction, and would love to do more, and would love to expand the scale of that and the scale of my collage work as well. It's usually very intimate. It's intimately sized, but I do love it. And so now I'm actually this project is not published fully yet, but I'm now designing some etchings that will be an edition in and of itself, but then I'm also designing it with my collage in mind, so that I can also create almost like a flash sheet. I can create this imagery for collage and expand upon it in scale.
Huh. Cool.
So that's exciting. To be continued.
Do you want to talk about your medical year, the 2 years that you had, or do you want to skip that?
When I almost died.
That time.
That time was really profound. And I was diagnosed very suddenly with an autoimmune disease. So I got really ill in 2020. In a matter of a few months, I had to move home with my parents. I was on FMLA leave from work. I couldn't work, couldn't live on my own, and my ability just diminished so significantly. And I was very ill and underwent extensive hospitalizations. And so this lasted until 2022 when I finally reached remission with the help of, this was my Hail Mary medication, because the other treatments for autoimmunity is so, it's not, nobody really knows what's going on. So these things are really hard to diagnose and really hard to treat. Sometimes people are very fortunate and it gets resolved quickly. I went through every class of medication available and just continued to decline to the point where I was approved for hospice.
Oh, God.
And also talking about our identities. This is just an offshoot, but our identities and who we think we are, you with, our history, and it's such an integral part of you. And then me with my practice, and I'm a printmaker, and losing the ability to do anything. And then also my creativity was just gone. I just thought I would never be in my studio again. And at that point I was very, I had accepted it. It was a lot of really intense work that I had to do mentally. So my last medication worked, which is incredible. And it's also $16,000 a dose per injection, $16,000 per injection. So it's horribly expensive. And the first time I had even more expensive medications. I would have to go and sit in an infusion center, and they would hook me up to an IV and they would run the medications that way. So that was, $18,000 in an infusion center. So I guess it's kind of good those medications didn't work for me, because at least I have a $2,000 break. I'm very fortunate to have health insurance that covers half of that. I'm also my copay is $8,000. So I'm in a couple different copay assistant programs. So that's very complicated and leaves a lot to be thought about in terms of my stability and safety and the ability to stay in remission. So, I was trying this medication. I did finally reach remission in 2022, and then entered an also incredibly difficult period of recovery. And, I had horrible panic attacks and depression and PTSD and just a lot of medical trauma to go through, and loss of ability, and physical therapy to regain strength and mobility. And, eventually I became, I started feeling creativity again and the drive to be in my studio. And so the Healer, the newest one in my large series, is the first piece that I have made in my studio since really getting my life back. And I think of this time now as my second life, because I did not think I was going to be here.
Right. Oh, God. Yeah. Jesus, Lord, have mercy.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
And they have no idea why.
No, this started when I was 30. And that's very late for the onset of autoimmunity. And autoimmunity also doesn't run in my family. But then again, we don't know much about my dad's side of the family. So that comes into it, the medical, along with everything else, medical history. And so, yeah, who knows? Nobody knows why it would have started. It was super fast in 6 months. I was cycling a lot. So I was going basically from cycling in my best form, 50 miles, a day, to being bedridden at my parents' house in about 6 months. So it's just really crazy. And no, there are no sufficient answers. My medication can also cause cancer.
Oh, so, Jesus.
Yeah. So I have to do a lot of medical upkeep, and my ability is just not, it's just not, I still have a lot of areas where I'm still learning myself. And it's interesting. So I'm hoping eventually one of my specialists is willing to help me try to back off the medication once I'm in deep remission for 2 years. So I'm hoping to be able to do that and have freedom from the bill, and also the really scary, and the medical maintenance, and then, scary possibility of side effects.
Right. Yeah. Well, how often do you have to take this $16,000 baby?
every 8 weeks.
Ay,
So yeah, it's shipped to my house in a cooler, and yeah, it's an injection that I do.
I don't I don't
Yeah,
even,
I know.
yeah. The not knowing, I think, would drive me batty, but I assume that one just must turn to being grateful to be alive and having that take the place of the worry.
Yeah, and it's interesting because once you're like in the churn of the medical system in this country, it's like you really realize so much of healthcare is administration.
Mm.
And it's so hard to get actual care that's not crazy expensive things or surgeries just being prescribed. And they were pushing me into trying to push me into surgeries that I'm so glad I didn't do. And like with autoimmunity, it's like there's no definitive test for a lot of autoimmune diseases. You look at your bucket of symptoms and you throw a medication at it and see what happens. And a lot of my symptoms, they thought I might have Crohn's disease, but a lot of those I couldn't methylate nutrients from my food. And so
Oh,
I was just starving. Basically, for a while, I was just starving. Became very malnourished, which led to a lot of my loss of ability and mobility. And but then I had a lot of neurological problems, and I had crazy hormonal imbalances. And then I would have, my joints would swell up like crazy, or my hands would start shaking, so I couldn't even write. And just like all these, full systemic. And it was at that point, that was when it was really bad. And it started with, a handful of symptoms and getting tests for that. And they saw my elevated white blood cells. So they're like, okay, autoimmune disease. Then it was just a whole bunch of tests and labs and trying to figure it out while I got sicker and sicker, and medications that weren't working. So by the time it was really bad, it was just like dominoes. It was just like a house of cards that was falling down, and this cascade effect that, the other systems in my body were just not able to compensate. So it's kind of crazy to think how like we're so resilient, but then at a certain point, it's just like, wow, life is so fragile. It's a really interesting dichotomy.
yeah. I mean, I think I've come to feel that all of life is double sided. Everything's an opposition, right? Life, death, whatever.
Oh yeah.
I've never really thought that way until recently. I'm like, you know what? Everything goes, it's like, I don't know. My brain isn't structured that way somehow. But now I'm like, oh, yeah, now I see it.
Oh yeah, I've always felt like straddled between opposites that way in so many areas of my life. And I joke that's why I like to work in pairs and diptychs and in opposites often, because it's the way I deal with that.
Are you a Gemini or a Libra?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, yes, I am. Yes, I am.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
it's funny. I do know this. I'm a Gemini sun and like rising and Libra moon.
Oh, I
If
don't know
I
what that
said
means.
that right,
Oh,
I
you
don't
got
know.
both.
I've got both, yeah.
Oh,
But I double down on the Gemini.
okay. Wow.
That's pretty much all I know about.
I don't know what my risings things are. I've never
Yeah.
really checked that out,
Well,
but all I know is I'm very Capricorn. Whenever I read Capricorn, I'm like, oh, that's me.
yeah, yeah, and it's funny because I had friends that got really into like there's like a horoscope app, and so I joined that with my friends, and then that's how I learned about that, and then I became disinterested and don't.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. On the PTSD part, have you done any EMDR sort of work to try and
I
manage
was
those?
in different therapies for that, and the Alpha Stem was very helpful for me, which is like a brain wave therapy. I'm going to do a terrible job of describing this, but it's like you put these little electrodes on your earbuds, and you can set it to a different setting. But it works with the alpha waves in your brain using really light electrical pulses.
Do they alternate?
It alternates.
Because
And
that's
you
very much
can't.
what EMDR is like.
Yes, yes, it is. And I didn't do the alpha stem is what I did along with some other therapies and some medications and did that with doctor guidance. But this is something that is also prescribed to vets for PTSD.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, it was really helpful, and I still do it. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's you can set your level based on your comfort, and it's, you do it so that you're not getting like motion sick, but it can make you feel like you're like rocking back and forth on a boat.
Oh.
It's kind of, yeah, it's funky.
Oh, I get seasick. That would be
Yeah,
bad.
you wouldn't you'd have to do the little level.
Right. Exactly. Oh God. I mean, I'm sure that your work has changed, but I feel like the essence of you has come through, and it hasn't been cut out or pushed aside by this traumatic experience of this really weird illness thing,
Yeah.
which obviously is to your credit. But it just sort of gives me hope in humanity that our essences won't just sort of dissolve. It's always there somewhere. You just have to kind of let it come back.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought, and to give it space and time too. Like, I had to come back to myself and kind of relearn myself. And I ended up having to do that very intentionally too. And yeah, there are ideas and themes in my work that I think have just really solidified. My collage practice really solidified during that time, because it's what I could sit and do. And in some of my hospitalizations where I was like a little more alert and able to work on stuff, I had my little collage pieces there and would work on those. And I think that really helped my sanity. But it's also definitely informed the new etching work that I'm doing, again, to plug future projects that I hope I can get to soon. Frustrating, I'm sure everybody knows about this in their life, but it's like our work is years ahead of where we are, right? Because like our ideas travel so much faster and work so much faster than we're physically able to. And so there's so much work that I'm eager to get to now, and I'm excited to get to. And my ideas have developed so much faster than I can make the work, or, faster than I have time to work. So.
Wow. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Huh. You must have a lot in your head.
I wish I could turn it down a little.
Yeah, right. Do you have like do you have a sketchbook? We've talked about sketchbooks with a couple of artists, and everybody has a different approach. It's fascinating.
I'm not a sketchbook person, and that's a practice that I've always wanted to develop, but sketchbooks just kind of freak me out. And I like to draw, but I have to draw on loose sheets of paper. There's something about the binding. I love a good sketchbook, but I have to have loose papers. And so I often draw on tracing paper because I like being able to layer things, which I guess is the printmaker in me, but I don't like working on opaque paper. And then I like a vellum as a drawing surface too. So that's how I do it. And I often draft for prints. I'll make thumbnail sketches of things, and I write notes. I take notes about things I'm thinking of, but I will often think of my drawing practice as drafting for a print.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's fair.
But I'd love to draw. I'd love to draw more. And I actually, I would like to learn how to do it on an iPad. I'm like an old elder millennial here, but I think it would be nice, because it would be easy for me to take around with me, and people would say, well, so is a sketchbook, but I don't like sketchbooks. So I think that would be a good in between for me.
Right.
I think maybe.
I find that, I mean, as somebody who writes a lot, like I don't have a journal. I don't keep a journal. I hate journaling.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what we feel. No.
Yeah, sure.
But it's the iPad, like if it's not sitting out where I can see it, it's gone. Like that would not work for me.
Yeah. I get that too. And I talk about this, this idea of like, oh, I'd like to develop that practice. I have no idea if I would.
Right.
I need to play with it and see if it's valid.
Right. Exactly.
For me. Yeah.
All right. So you're working on some etchings. Anything else that's coming up we need to know about?
I am going to start development on the final piece in the series, The Fool, when I can manage to start. So that will be coming. And I think the best place to follow my progress is my Instagram, because I do post a lot of process there and progress stuff. And that's just my name, Annalise Gratovich. But other than that, I have a show coming up in Santa Fe at the end of the year, which I'm very excited about. Lovely gallery there that shows a lot of works on paper, called Hetcho Gallery. And Frank there does an amazing job with his artist and showing a lot of print. And then I will be doing, really excited about this, and I don't think there's a reason to not announce it, but I'm going to be doing the In Cahoots residency in the fall of this year, which is going to be really thrilling. So that will be 2 weeks of dedicated work time.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, which will be super fun. My first time second time doing a residency like this, because usually I do academic residencies. So it's like 5 days, very intense, working with a team, and, there's student mentorship and usually a lecture, so it's very intense and very short, because that's usually what I can fit into my work schedule. So it'll be interesting tackling a larger residency and seeing how that
is In Cahoots. Is that the one out in Sonoma?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
I didn't know about them till recently. I was like, oh, who are these folks?
Yeah, I have followed them for a little while and seeing their facilities being built, and then some artists going out there who I admire. And so I decided to throw my hat in the ring, and I would love to do more residencies and try to develop some of these ideas, because it's hard for me to feel like I can make meaningful progress on evenings and weekends. And that continues to be a frustration of mine. And I'm trying to figure out how to manage in my life.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be really frustrating. Like, I don't know how people do it. Come home and go straight into the studio. Like, oy.
It's harder for me than it used to be.
Yeah.
And back when I was working at the print shop, I would have my day job, and then I would go take a break, and I would just come back and work in the shop and self-publish. And that worked really well. Now my job is it's just very different. So I leave my work studio and I come home. I'm usually pretty exhausted because I'm working on my feet all day. And then, I have to go to my studio and get started. And then by that time, it's like dinner time. Sometimes I'm more successful in the practice than other times. My stamina also just doesn't last the way that it used to. Fatigue hits me very differently now. So, I try to keep workout and accessible and just do what I can a little chunk at a time.
Right. And
I know that very big things are possible a little tiny bit at a time.
Right.
So that tends to be my MO.
Okay. Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a morning person, so I'm worthless after about 4 o'clock.
Yeah, I love mornings. I have been kind of training myself to be a morning person. So now I'm trying to, and I do this successfully for a while until I get a bit too fatigued and I have to change my routine. But I try to be at work 7:30 to 3:30, and then I can go take a break and then have an evening/night at the studio.
Nice.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked for longer than an hour, which I always find amazing how quickly an hour can go.
It just flies by.
Flies right by.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah. So people should follow you on Instagram, and they should keep a lookout for all the wonderful things that are coming your way, because things are coming your way. It's so great.
Yeah. It's going to be a big studio year. I'm hoping I churn out some of these new publications I'm thinking about.
One last question about the series. Are you selling them individually, or have you sold a whole set with the promise of the 8th one coming?
I have not yet. They are usually sold individually. I think the most I've sold to one person or institution is 4.
Okay.
I would love to house a whole suite somewhere. So that's a dream for sure. And I think, when you see them installed all together, the way that they're in conversation with one another just makes it just really, it makes it alive. It brings it to life, and of course that's the way I intend them to be seen. And I have this exhibition right now at the Plains Art Museum in Fargo. So that is the first time I've seen all 7 hung together. And that was really amazing. They
look fabulous.
Thank you. They've really honored me with that show and that placement and the work that they've done there with my work. So that's really special. And then Flatbed here, the Flatbed show is the second time I've seen them, but the first time in Austin, which is here, where I'm based. So really
I feel like they're like what is it, Mulan, and where all the ancestors are surrounding her as she's deciding to go fight.
That's cool. I haven't seen that.
Oh, you have? Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's sort of like trying to figure out what she's doing, and she goes to visit the ancestors in the family ancestor house, and they're all sort of sitting around, and they're all like lifting her up. That's how I feel about your pieces.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Annalise, thank you for coming on Platemark. It's been lovely talking to you, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Ann. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with Annalise Gratovich. She is one of the artists in the 5x5 show, part of Print Austin's Winter Festival in 2024. I hope you enjoyed our talk. She's a delight, and I do love her work. So I hope you will check her out, look her up, follow her on her socials, and help her make her dreams come true. Thank yous need to go out as usual. Well, one, of course, to Annalise for being a great guest. Thank you. And one to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for his help with sound and editing. One to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And one to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for the use of their studio sounds at the top end of the show. Now you're supposed to go over to the website, platemarkpodcast.com, check out all the images we put there for you to get a gander at Annalise's work, and also hit the support and donate button, become a monthly subscriber, and you will help me keep the lights on. It's a labor of love, and it's just me. Okay, I think that's it. We'll see you next time.